Namaste. I am Dr. Varaprasad, Farmer Director, Indian Institute of Oilseeds Research, Hyderabad, an ICAR institute. Currently, I am working as a consultant for Indo-German Global Project on Agroecology, Research and Learning, and also a UN Food Systems Forgotten Food Project, and also Revitalizing Rainfed Agricultural Network. Today, we will discuss about the conservation and revival of indigenous varieties seed system. So the indigenous varieties can also be known as traditional varieties. Indigenous means the varieties that are made within our country, that is India. Traditional means they are being using them after development within India traditionally. Farmer varieties signifies that these are the varieties that are developed by the farmers. Ethnic varieties indicates that most of these are initially developed by the tribal groups. They are also called as tribal varieties, and in some context they are also called as varieties of common knowledge. And you can also call them as community varieties or ecotypes. Ecotypes because the ecosystem from where they belong to, they originate, that's where they have been developed and used. And under taxonomic parlance, that you can also call them as land races, a subspecies below the subspecies level, a category of land races. And they can also be called as wild types. So in this presentation, I may be using some of these synonymously, these words. And these are the varieties which are cultivated for a long time, maybe hundreds of years, in their pristine habitats. And they are evolved based on their ecological stability, suitability, and farmer or consumer needs are taken care. Based on that, they keep on selecting them, and also not only their needs but also their preferences, that either for themselves or for the animals or the ecosystem needs. And this selection process is a farmer intervention to develop them from a wild type to a variety, which we may call it as indigenous variety or traditional variety. Field performance is often expressed only in their adopted or similar ecosystems, because they have been grown in the same ecosystem in live conditions for hundreds of years. So they are adapted to such ecosystem where they have been selected and are being cultivated. They respond very positively to location-specific traditional package of practices or nature-based package of practices, or we may call them as natural farming practices or nature harmonious practices. But normally these indigenous varieties response to chemical input intensive package of practices is minimum. That means under these currently the national policy is also to promote natural farming, and under these conditions most of the high yielding, hybrid and improved varieties that are in cultivation, they may not respond if they are subjected to the natural farming conditions. And in this context, the importance of the indigenous varieties is much more than what we talk about in the previous contexts, like when the natural farming is not there as a policy or not being given such importance. These one of the best advantages is these indigenous varieties are co-evolved harmoniously with the local biodiversity. By local biodiversity I mean the weed species in competition, the wild relatives that are present in the surroundings with which they interact, they also get pollinated, they may evolve based on the soil conditions and the environment or the climatic changes that occur, they face in life, they improve, automatically the successful plant types are selected, and then you call them as a variety. So normally our modern agriculture has not really considered indigenous varieties, rather they considered these indigenous varieties as a germplasm. Germplasm means that is only a breeding material for crop improvement. As such, the hundreds of years of effort of the farmers in selection for that ecosystem and the co-evolution that has happened has not gained much importance, and because of these reasons the chemical intensive agriculture these varieties were almost, they phased out, and that's why we need to revive them under the conditions of natural farming, which we are promoting now. Why do we actually take up these indigenous varieties is mainly because of their climate resilience, pest resilience, their nutrient density, which they have got in a very specific advantage of nutrient density is there in these indigenous varieties, and also their input requirement is very marginal. That means under rain-fed conditions, these indigenous varieties perform much better. So their water requirement is less, or rather they don't need any fertilizers or pesticides. They have a horizontal resistance where the pest may occur, but it will not damage the entire crop. So because of this climate resilience, their association with the microorganisms, both above ground and below ground, when the chemical intensive agriculture has come into place, now we are facing the climate emergency, water emergency, soil emergency, and we need to really see that how do we really cope up with this situation, and we move towards sustainable agriculture so that we don't end up with giving a bad environment and ecology to our next generation. So under this context, if you see in any crop, you find that the nutrient density is much higher. Lot of data is not available in this context, but whatever data is available with reference to nutrient density on land races in almost any crop, whether it is millets, oilseeds, or the cereals, we find them that they are very rich. If you can see here, we can see normal 1.9 milligrams of zinc per 100 grams, whereas in the different colored rices that we have, it is up to 6.6 even, which is almost 3 times more than the normal varieties. And same is the case with the iron, where you find the normal is 2.8, but you have up to 4.2 in case of the iron also. And there are certain indigenous varieties from Kerala which are actually specifically selected for iron richness. They are called as the variety as Raktashali, where they are red rices with very rich in iron, much more than what I am now presenting here. So the magnesium is also, normal is 52, because magnesium deficiencies are normally found nowadays, and particularly for calcium in case of millets, zinc in case of rice are highly deficient in the human and animal systems, and that's actually being circulated, and a lot of health issues are coming up because of lack of nutritional richness in the released varieties or high yielding and hybrid varieties. Now, because of their various traits that I told you, resilience to climate, resilience to pest, and the input requirement is very less, and the nutrient richness is there, and their ability to withstand extreme aberrations in the climate. These are the traits for which now indigenous varieties globally as well as within India gaining lot of importance to use them in the breeding approaches. Then where do we get them? Do we have them readily available to mainstream them, or do we need to make special efforts to collect them? This is the conservation approaches will tell us where they are available right now for access of these indigenous varieties. So if you see the conservation approaches that are known globally, they are in situ and ex situ, 2 kinds. And when we talk of conservation, the best form of conservation is in situ in its original habitat, and also through use, not just for the purpose of conservation. Conservation through use is the best way to conserve any variety. So then we have the biosphere reserves, the national parks, the gene sanctuaries, and the on-farm conservation. All of them, they try to conserve these indigenous varieties in their own habitat rather than taking them out. So in this, what are those that are conserved? The wild species, the wild relatives. These are the ones which will give opportunity to indigenous varieties to co-evolve by actually multiple crossings that occur naturally occurring crosses, and then they evolve, and the best one is selected for taking it forward. The land races or the traditional varieties are also conserved as in situ. Then if we come to the ex situ, when in situ is not always possible because of the various conditions that you have to compensate, and then you have to see that the integrity is maintained within the field and open systems. In such cases, in situ is not always possible, and in such cases we move to the ex situ, so that for contingency we have the genetics or genome or genetic resources are available for use, we can take them out and use it. So in the ex situ, we have the field gene bank, where you always maintain them out of their natural habitat, but within the field. They are called crop gene banks or field gene banks. And arboretum, in case of the trees, if you grow them outside their habitat, then that is ex situ conservation. Herbal gardens is a common form of conservation of the medicinal plant species, particularly which is accessible to the Unani, Siddhi, Ayurvedic types of medicines. These plants are, which are in a way, the indigenous genetic stocks or indigenous varieties that are accessible to these doctors, naturopathy doctors, where they can use them and they conserve in the field gene bank. Then we have the botanical gardens, which are mostly public funded, and they are available for education as well as for conservation purpose. The other part of the ex situ conservation is seed gene banks. Seed gene bank, though we call it as a gene bank, it's actually seeds which are conserved there. It's not actually genes. But when we define what gene is present in that seed, then it becomes a seed gene bank. That means when we add the value of the trait of the indigenous variety, for which whether it has a pest resilience or nutrient density, and when we know that this is the trait that is available in the indigenous variety, information associated with the conservation, then we know that it is a seed gene bank. We are conserving that gene through this seed. And we have the in vitro gene bank. The in vitro gene bank is actually some of the plant species, they don't produce seed, or the seed is not amenable for conservation. That means it will loses its viability at the temperatures where we store, or even otherwise it loses its viability. In such cases, tissue culture is the best form of conserving such plants. So in vitro gene bank is another method. Cryogene bank, neither seed is there nor tissue culture protocols are developed for some crops or some of the indigenous varieties. Then in such case we resort to cryo bank. This is actually low temperature. You take apical meristem or growing tips and you can store them in with due protocols developed. Then you can take it out and develop it into a full plant. That is the cryo bank. And nowadays the most commonly used bank is DNA bank. So even from the indigenous varieties, many of the global institutes, including India, they have extracted DNA from these indigenous varieties and they are conserving. So this DNA bank is now extremely useful after the latest technology of gene editing is not only globally accepted, but India has also approved the gene editing technology to be used without regulation. So then the genes present or the DNA that we extract from these indigenous varieties becomes extremely important for use in the crop improvement programs. So these are the different ways and different parts or different varieties that are being stored both in situ and ex situ. Then this is now, if you see on your left, in fact it is the in vitro conservation just below, right below. You can see that the tissue culture plants which are not amenable for the seed or for conservation otherwise, the tissue culture conservation. And those big tanks that what you see, they are the cryo tanks, which is the cryopreservation. And with the door what you see is the long-term gene bank where minus 20 degrees centigrade is maintained and the relative humidity is maintained very low, maybe around 15% or even lesser. And the seed, when we conserve in these seed gene banks, we have to bring down the seed moisture content to less than 7%, 8%, and or sometimes in some cases even up to 5%. And then they are stored in proper sealed mechanisms, either the packets. And then once you conserve these indigenous varieties in such a process, in either of the in vitro or in vitro has to be continuously updated, or you have to, reculturing is required, and growth is restricted there. And in case of cryo, as well as in case of the long-term seed conservation, up to 100 years, they are maintained their viability. However, the gene banks, these are the photographs of the National Gene Bank of India, located in the National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources, New Delhi. This is a National Gene Bank for conservation of plant germplasm that includes the indigenous varieties. So they can remain viable for about 100 years. However, every 10 years, they will monitor the viability, and wherever some of the crops like jackfruit, or some of the crops like oil seeds, they may lose viability because of their oil content. In such cases, replenishment or rejuvenation of the seeds, and with more than 90% viability, again they are replaced and grown under controlled conditions. So this is actually ex situ gene conservation example that includes indigenous varieties. Then where are the other places? It is in India. So there is also a concept that to maintain minus 20 degrees centigrade is an expensive process. And also the gene banks are normally well protected from the natural calamities. But in spite of that, the nations may lose their gene bank. One example is the ICAR-IIOR gene bank in Syria. Because of the political conditions there, the gene bank material was lost. They have shifted to Morocco, and they had to collect all the germplasm from other places. To avoid such kind of exigencies, there is a concept that has come out that we will have one global seed vault. Crop Diversity Trust is also part of this effort, which is global. And this global seed vault, which is located in Svalbard, 243 countries contributed germplasm from their countries, and genera are more than 1,000, 6,000 species, and 983,000 accessions are stored here. And even if you see, it is about 2 years old that we had 73,000 actions, and another consignment for this small bird has gone from India. So we almost have about 1 lakh or 100,000 accessions conserved in this global seed vault. The speciality of this global seed vault is you don't require any electricity to maintain the temperature. Naturally occurring temperature is minus 40. And then you don't need to construct any room, because it is there are caves within these mountains filled with ice, and then you just can go and keep it without any maintenance. You can keep these things, and whenever there is any exigency for any country that they want to get back their seeds, it is possible to get back from them. And in the worldwide, if you see the gene banks, there are about 1,750 gene banks which conserve the plant germplasm, and which includes the indigenous varieties. And in more than 100 countries, 7.4 million seed samples are conserved. So why actually the indigenous varieties did not get enough attention? There is a reason. The reason is when we were concerned about the food security and the ever-increasing population, human population, then our effort was directed to quickly improve the yield of the crops, and then look at every diversity available in the nature as a plant breeding material. But in the process, what we have done is we have ignored the indigenous varieties which have been developed by the due intelligence and diligence by our forefathers, the communities which have contributed and developed these indigenous varieties, and we never gave them the status of a variety. We looked at them in these gene banks only as an accession. And even if we see the information associated with these indigenous varieties, the name also indicates what is its speciality, what is it for which need it has been developed or selected, for which need or preference it has been selected. This information, names of the varieties, are less than 30% in these gene banks, which means our focus in the gene banks, ex situ gene banks, has always been looking it as a plant breeding parental material rather than as indigenous varieties developed with diligence and intelligence, so that we can use them, or we can use them under natural farming conditions where there is a lot of potential now. Now if you see, it's not only this small bird, there are about 17 CG institutes, a consultative group of international agricultural research. And there are certain international research centers of germplasm which are holding the crop germplasm with them as a trust, FAO trust. They have been holding this germplasm, which is about 8 million germplasm. You can see different crops and different institutes like ICAR-IIOR for millets, and the other two pulses, pigeon pea and groundnut, are also part of this. And rice, International Rice Institute, ICARDA, then ILRI, most of these institutes are global institutes, either CG or world institutes, like Vegetable Center, World Vegetable Center, WVC, in Taiwan, also has got 61,000 actions of different vegetables conserved there. So if you are looking for indigenous varieties to mainstream it, I have told you the sources nationally, and I have also told you the sources internationally. So depending upon your requirement, and then these gene banks did not create any indigenous variety. They have collected it from the farmers, they have collected it from the real-time situation, and then conserved it. So if you have the passport data, and if you are looking for a good indigenous variety which was collected from your region where you are focusing for mainstreaming these indigenous varieties, you can access them. And even after the CBD, where that is a conventional biological diversity, the rights from the human right, which used to be prior to CBD, prior to 1993, human right has become a country's right now for germplasm. But in spite of that, all the germplasm that is collected and conserved in these international gene banks or even national gene banks, then we have what is collected prior to 1993 still remains as a human right, and you can access them. And to access a germplasm or indigenous varieties from these gene banks, we also have another instrument, a global instrument called International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. This is called ITPGRFA, or simply it is also called as Plant Treaty. The latest treaty meeting was held in India. We hosted that meeting. So it has about 64 species listed there, which is called as annex table, and these species, any country request for these material, then we cannot say no. That's the agreement. All the countries which have signed this ITPGRFA or plant treaty, they are supposed to supply the germplasm or indigenous varieties so that you can mainstream them or you can use them. So access is guaranteed. While rights are given through CBD, plant treaty ensures that you still have access for the material from all the countries, whether it is collected from your country or elsewhere. If it is a traditional variety, you can always get it and evaluate it and use it for your further purposes. Then if you see the indigenous varieties today, where we are, because today's topic is on revival. Revival means somewhere we lost it. So it is not completely dead. There is a possibility to revive these indigenous varieties into cultivation. But where do we understand? Where do we actually stand today on the coverage of these indigenous variety? If you see the example of the paddy, it's cultivated more than 40 million hectares in India, and we have 40,000 farmer varieties or indigenous varieties in India. 40,000 varieties, when I say, it's a very conservative number, because there are NGOs who claim that more than 200,000 indigenous varieties are there in India. But it is a matter of fact that in states like Chhattisgarh, where rice is a main crop, you know that more than 30,000 varieties were under cultivation. These indigenous varieties, for different purposes, they are being cultivated, and based on the farmer's need, nutritional need, for climate, to deal with the climate emergency, we have 30,000 varieties, which now has become almost replaced by the improved varieties and hybrids. Then if you see, there are almost, in case of rice, 1100 varieties or hybrids are released, and 30 varieties will cover more than 70% of the 40 million hectares or more that is being cultivated in India. And one variety, this is called BPT 5204, is cultivated in more than 25% area. What does all this mean? It all means the improved varieties have replaced the indigenous varieties, and consequently the indigenous varieties occupy a very little area today. So that's the reason why we need to also revive them. And what is the ecosystem diversity? The ecosystem diversity, if you see, when we are growing any crop, then any indigenous variety, it's not that just variety that gives performance. It's the surrounding the plant diversity, then soil biodiversity, where you have the earthworms and the birds are there, and there are many types of microorganisms in the soil which contribute in supplying the nutrition to the plant, and the presence of these microorganisms and the other biodiversity, ecosystem biodiversity, is systematically destroyed over last 6 decades, and we are monocrop culture has become a rule of the day, and that's how we have really lost many of the linkages with the ecosystem diversity of the indigenous varieties. So if today indigenous variety has to perform, we need to actually not only revive the indigenous variety, but also we have to revive the ecosystem. So the damage done through the chemicals, what we have put into the place, has to be replenished, restored, then only the performance will come. And if you compare between the world and India, if you see, we have almost India has only 2% of the total land mass of the global land mass available, but we have 18% of the algae available in our country when we compare with the world. Similarly, if you see gymnosperms, then Animalia, the taxonomic group, there are in a very rich Protista, which has a lot of role in the soil biology, which we have ignored, and soil emergency situation has come because the diversity that was existent in association with the indigenous varieties, we have lost it. That's the reason why I am just showing the ecosystem diversity of different taxonomic categories, whether it is, there are some nematodes which contribute to the organic matter decomposition, which we have studied very little or no in India, and there are certain annelids which are extremely important for soil fertility. Out of 17,000 species, 1,000 species are there in India, and we have the several others where we have got a huge number. And if you see, the total diversity that is available is almost 2% land mass is holding about 7% of the diversity, both aerial diversity and soil diversity. And this ecosystem diversity has direct linkage and association of our 10,000 years of agricultural history in India. They have a lot of association, and we need to restore this to avoid the chemicals. Then if you see what is the plant diversity in India, we have got 127,000 species of plants, animals and microbes, 18,000 species of higher plants, that means flowering plants are 18,000 are there, and around 6,000 flowering plants and endemic to India. That means if we lose in India, we lose in the world. That's the kind of situation there. Then we have 5,000 totally economically useful species. That means including not only for food, fiber and medicinal use. And we have 583 crop plant species that are cultivated. See, it is very unfortunate that when we have 583 crop plant species that we cultivate, globally or even in India more than 500 crops are cultivated, but 5 crops will constitute 60% of the energy consumed by the human beings. Where is 500 crops and where is just 5 crops giving your energy needs just from 5 crops? Traditionally our communities have a better knowledge, and you will be surprised to know that there are about 500 ethnic leafy vegetables which are not sown. They are naturally occurring, and the people know how much to harvest and use it, and they also know not only its nutrient richness but also their medicinal uses also. So the leafy vegetables. So losing all that knowledge as well as the indigenous species and varieties, we have paid a heavy price in compensation for the food security that we wanted for the ever increasing human population. there are about 168 crop plant species in the Hindustan center. Then 334 wild relatives, which are also extremely important. These wild relatives many times have the compatibility to combine with the crop indigenous varieties that are in cultivation. Then they keep on contributing the genes that are required to withstand climate and pest resilience. We have several wild edible plant species, more than 1,000. There is an extremely urgent need that these indigenous varieties, which are very rich in nutrients, very diverse, high fiber content, which are the need of the day for the human nutrition, are available, and the knowledge is also available with our communities, which we need to promote it. Then if you see the kind of diversity, you will be surprised. Almost 130,000 accessions of the paddy are available in International Rice Research Institute, Philippines. And we have more than 80,000 in India, our national gene bank. So this is, the gene banks have a good diversity available, just they are sleeping in the gene banks, and there is a need to bring them back for the advantage of the human health and human nutrition needs. Then similarly, you can see that the chickpea, see what a green chickpea, not only just Kabuli chickpea or Deshi chickpea, we have a large number of, there are more than 12,000 accessions of chickpea stored in the ICAR-IIOR gene bank. So there are a lot of traditional varieties or indigenous varieties are also collected and stored in the international gene banks. So they are, in a way, if the passport data indicates India, we have right to get them back and then popularize. There is a chickpea, also the Desi varieties have an international market also, particularly in case of the pulses, there is a lot of demand, and these indigenous varieties have a specific demand because of their taste and because of their nutritional value. Brinjal, you can see that in case of brinjal, you have a lot of variability. Do you know that in India, there are 1,200 varieties of brinjal have been collected and conserved in the National Gene Bank. These varieties have a specific use. Sometimes when you have to make a chutney out of that, a special variety is there. If you have to mix it with the non-vegetarian, like the prawns or fish, a special variety of brinjal is there. And then if you have to make the Bengal preparations of just grilling and using it, there is a special variety. So a lot of diversity is present in India, just not one BT brinjal where higher yield comes, and then it has the ability to withstand the borer, fruit and shoot borer. That's not the single trait. In lieu of that, we don't want to lose these indigenous varieties, which are extensively used in states like Orissa even till today. There are many medicinal values for the Solanum species, which are wild relatives of the brinjal also. So then if you see that there are several medicinal plants, this is one such example, that Abrus precatorius, you find 4 colors here, different types of colors, different diversity for their use in the medicinal. So this is our nature's wealth that we have. And then there are trees also, number of trees you have got, a lot of the Malabar tamarind and many others, even the neem, common neem, you have a lot of diversity which needs to be indicated. Then there is, it's not that we completely ignored the indigenous varieties. Some effort has been done at the national level, and the National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources has made some effort, particularly in some crops where these indigenous varieties collected, and they found that this is almost competing in the yield with the released varieties, and plus they have a special traits for their smell, for their taste, for their nutritional value. They have been released as varieties through collection and a little bit of selection, and they have been released. Some of the examples are there in case of the paddy. It is Maruter Sannalu, which is, Maruter is a place where we have the rice research station, and in the interiors of north coastal districts, this has been collected, and it is on demand. When we collected, multiplied, lot of farmers recognize this variety, and they have taken the seed to grow. And yardlong bean, which is also collected indigenously and released by the Indian Institute of Horticulture Research as a variety. And we have the coriander, the name Sudha is given to that variety, which is nothing but a indigenous variety, just simple purification and released. And we have a beautiful variety, pigeon pea, which is rich in protein and also can grow perfectly under the natural farming conditions, give a very higher yield, and in the high altitude areas also. Erra Matsa Kandi, it's actually from Adilabad district, and these are the examples of varieties, indigenous varieties that have been selected and then promoted by registering them as indigenous varieties through the PPFRA. Then if you can see in case of sorghum, there is the popcorn. This is actually special variety for popping. Its popping is not only corn, in sorghum also popping is possible, and it has a commercial product also. Our Indian Institute of Millet Research brought out of this variety. This is called as Pelal Zonna as a common name in Telugu, and it is now available for cultivation. Similarly, Dolichos bean, Gane Chikkudu, is also collected and released. There is another special variety called as Balintha Pesalu, which is actually the name of the indigenous variety indicates what for it is used or what is its the trait of value. This particular variety, green gram, but it is in yellow in color. This is cultivated in Adilabad. It is available in the market also in Adilabad. So this is a special variety given to mothers, lactating mothers, that the child will grow much better with a quality and higher protein available in this Balintha Pesalu. So these are some of the indigenous varieties, specialities, and as you see that our National Gene Bank has 450,000 accessions. Out of that, at least 30% are indigenous varieties. So there, what we have done, the effort for 6 or 10 varieties is very minimum. There is a huge scope for bringing back the indigenous varieties for the special traits for which they have been selected and brought out by our communities and our forefathers. Then if you see from the high altitude areas, the rise from high altitude areas, you find beautiful colors and the shapes and sizes and scent. Even the smell is not just restricted to basmati. We have several indigenous varieties. Even within Telangana, we have the Medak district. We have a variety of the paddy called as Balintha Pesalu. No, sorry, it is called as Chittumutyalu. So this Chittumutyalu is not only scented, but it is preferred variety for consumption by those areas, and still it is being cultivated by some farmers for their own consumption. But only thing is we have to popularize it. Ecosystem based popularization is the need of the day. Then if you see, we have the several traditional cropping systems that are existent in India, and they are all woven with the indigenous varieties. And it's a multi-crop or polycropping systems. They are never monocrop situations. And the yield and the productivity of the land is much higher than monocrop. And now we have interest, and in a separate project by the RRAN, that is revitalizing rain-fed areas, particularly in the rain-fed situations, these traditional cropping systems, there is a lot of value attached for not only for the livelihood, nutrition, climate resilience, and also their productivity is very surprises are there. These are being tested in a project there. And if you see that different regions of India, like from Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Kerala, Karnataka, or even if you see the Andhra Pradesh, that Navadhanya system, in Odisha, we have the another method, Chasar, then Olya from Madhya Pradesh, then you have Jharkhand also, there is Kurwa. So different cropping systems. This is only scraping the surface. You have several traditional cropping systems across India which require special attention and a project approach to study them and to study the combination of indigenous varieties and crops that they used as a livelihood, nutrition, climate resilient systems, and we need to attach the value for that and bring back this glory of these traditional cropping systems again. Then we have just talked about the indigenous varieties, their importance and their additional advantages, and now any variety cannot go on its own. it has to be coupled with a seed system. That means a developing variety, improved variety by a formal breeding system, or developing a traditional variety over hundreds of years by the communities, even that requires a seed system. If you don't have seed system, you have a variety with you, but will remain with the farmers who are cultivating, but it will not further spread. So in this, the seed system, it contains the plant breeding and genetics, where the crop, the indigenous variety is developed. After that, the seed production, seed processing and treatment, seed packaging and storage, seed testing and seed sales, seed distribution, and quality seed access to farmers. This is the final result of the seed system. So the seed system that are existent currently in India, they're all directed towards the formal varieties release, but not for the indigenous varieties. This gap we felt in the Orissa millet mission when we were working, that some of the land races or indigenous varieties are performing, are giving higher yield and better quality, better resistance to pests than the released varieties under natural farming conditions. So what does this mean? It means that the new paradigm of natural farming, when it comes, the expression or the performance of the high yielding varieties or hybrids against the indigenous varieties, there needs to be a relook and look at them to see that how really some of the varieties are performing better than released varieties under natural farming conditions, and we should take it forward. And why alternate seed system is because of their, already I have given you some of the points why indigenous varieties, like the taste is something which you can't change. Some of the tribal groups in Odisha, when we went them, asked them, why are you growing this variety? You have a better high yielding variety. Then they say, that is all for market, but to eat for our family we need this variety. So it's not only the taste but also nutrition and the culinary process, what they follow. Some of these varieties are suitable for the cooking processes that they follow, the color preference by the farmers, and sometimes the religious needs. The black sesame has a specific religious need in many of the functions, and they need to maintain that to have the access to these religious needs also. So these are some of the reasons why indigenous varieties needs to be popularized. The formal seed system and PPVFRA, they are in place to cater to the notified either by the Central Variety Release Committee or the State Variety Release Committee, or registered with the Plant Variety Authority. So these are only serving the formal seed system, these categories, but not for the indigenous varieties. So we thought that there is a need for an alternative seed system for the indigenous varieties, and when we made this proposal with the government of Odisha, and it was discussed over a period of 3 years, and we took the input from all the plant breeders, formal institutes, certification agencies, and the other stakeholders of the seed. All of them have contributed, and now the government of Odisha approved an alternative seed system for the indigenous varieties, which is being tested on ground currently. Then the quality seed access of indigenous varieties is the main reason, and we don't want pan-India varieties. Indigenous varieties are always always to a specific ecosystem, so it cannot be across India. So then traditional knowledge also needs to be taken into consideration, and we call the communities for melas, then evaluate the indigenous varieties in the biodiversity blocks, and then mainstream the varieties with a lot of effort on evaluation across the multi-locations, and also including the farmers' variety, farmers' yield data. We take care of, and then finally come up with mainstreaming of a particular indigenous variety. Wherever purification or restoration of original indigenous variety structure, genetic structure or genetic purity is required, we will do that and bring it back. Protocols for all components of seed supply chain have also been developed to take care of this seed, quality seed available for the farmers. And what are the criteria revised in this alternative seed system? So evaluation will be limited to the area from where this indigenous variety originated. Then farmer seeds are also considered. Through the crop cutting experiments by the state government, certified data will also be the part of this proposal. Of course, nutrition analysis will be done, local preference will be taken into consideration, and the performance under the climatic aberrations is also taken care, and protocols for all the steps in the seed system are developed and documented. And by validation of all these protocols, a competent committee at the state level will approve in mainstreaming the indigenous varieties. Then we have provisions there are certain provisions for promotion of the indigenous varieties in our national acts or policies. The national acts, if we see, the Biological Diversity Act, which is one of the important acts in India, then this is also specifies promotion and also commercialization of the indigenous varieties. There is a provision here which hardly anybody uses it. Under section 7, these farmer varieties, if you want to collect it for commercial purpose, you need prior permission from the State Biodiversity Board. And after collection, when you commercialize, you need to take prior permission to commercialization, and any indigenous variety under this act can be collected, commercialized and popularized, which is perfectly legal as long as you take a State Biodiversity Board into consideration, and also you pay the access and benefit sharing with the communities from where it has been collected. Then similarly, we have a national seed policy, and there is a mention of indigenous varieties at several places in the national seed policy, but hardly there is any effort to either harness that provision or to improve that provision or to implement that provision at the country level. Equitable sharing of benefits, nothing happens because most of the breeders give the indigenous variety a number after they get it, and it is not being quoted when they register it or when they release it. Consequently, the communities which have conserved it for hundreds of years will not get any benefit sharing out of that new variety that is being released. Then it is also gives a provision that suitable systems will be worked out for the contributions from traditional knowledge and heritage. Very little is being done, and special attention will be given to need to upgrade the quality of farmers' saved seed. Even in spite of this progress in the seed systems in India, we have still a space of 35 to 40%. They don't get the improved varieties or hybrid seeds in India. So these 35-40%, they use their own farm saved seed. Maybe 30 years back released variety, maybe an indigenous variety, but they don't have access to the quality seed of these varieties which they prefer to grow. There is a provision in the National Seed Policy, but we need to take care. Then similarly, under the Plant Variety Authority, there is actually it is a Plant Variety Authority. It's not a Plant Species Authority. We have the excellent mapping done by this authority on the species level diversity, but the varietal database is missing at the authority level, and this missing because unless you work with the communities, NGOs, CSOs, you cannot develop or map such kind of meaningful diversity that exists on the ground even till today. The licensing process, there is a provision that if you don't, you recognize a farmer variety and authority, but the seed is not accessible. They got a certificate and they don't act further. There is a provision in this that a compulsory licensing can be done to locally supply that seed, even if the ownership given to so and so person, but not multiplying it. But this provision has hardly been used to make the indigenous varieties available to the communities. Then we have now what all we discuss till now is clearly indicates that indigenous varieties have a great potential for mainstreaming in view of their resilience to climate, the pests, the nutrient density, and low input requirement. That means they don't need fertilizers, chemicals, or the rain fed is fine, only rain that comes, but not the irrigation requirement is very less, and all the cultivation package of practices are in harmony with the nature-based solutions. So this will indicate that there is a long way to go to bring back these indigenous varieties and the traditional cropping systems in place. So the public sector research itself is not giving due recognition for the effort of our forefathers for developing these varieties and to look at their potential. See, over a period of time, for last 6 decades, if you have promoted the high-yielding varieties side by side of the indigenous varieties, some of them got mixed up, particularly in cross-pollinated and even in self-pollinated. So you need to restore these indigenous varieties, their original value, and restoring the seed genetics is not enough. It is also, you have to restore the ecosystem with reference to their soil health and with reference to the microbes, even the above soil also. This, you need a combined effort or collaborative effort with the CSOs to bring back these indigenous varieties. And crop breeding within the formal system, now there is a time that whether you call it as organic farming or natural farming, then you need to re-evaluate the improved varieties against the indigenous varieties, and then selection approach should be completely different. Then we should bring the synergized collaboration between the research and extension, and also the formal institutes, private institutes should start working with the civil society organizations and NGOs and farmer networks and farmer producer organizations, farmer producer companies. All of them should come together to bring a greater health of our ecosystem, greater health of our human beings, greater health of plants, and greater health of animals, and all agricultural diversity that we have with reference to not only production and consumption and popularization of indigenous varieties, which will bring not only the food security that we want it, but also the nutritional security that it is rampant in India, that more than 800 million people are actually suffering from the nutritional insecurity, which needs to be urgently addressed, not only the nutritional insecurity, but also the climate emergency, then pest emergency, then you have the water emergency, and you have the soil emergency. All these can be very harmoniously dealt when we bring back our indigenous varieties. Thank you very much.